Hello, and welcome to the final event of the 8th Annual Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference, sponsored by the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm Khadijah Marquardt-Davis, a co-chair of the conference of this conference and of the Conference Planning Committee. The theme of this year's conference is Radical Hope in a Racialized Society. By placing radical hope at the center of our work allows us to dream big and imagine creative solutions to our society's most pressing racial and social justice issues. Last Friday and today, we've gathered from across Dane County, Wisconsin, the nation, and even the globe. We have come together to consider ways to move social workers into concrete anti-racist action with radical hope. The closing plenary, a conversation on radical hope between Oceana Sawyer and Ali Muldrow, will start after these brief introductory remarks. This conference was started 8 years ago when current events forced us to re-examine how social workers respond to continual incidents of racial injustice. The need for this work is crystal clear today, just as it was when it first began. The popularity of this conference has made it very clear that social workers are striving to do better, be better, and are working to continually challenge ourselves. We know that critical reflection and action is required in our individual roles, but also in collective ways so that social workers become a force for change and to improve our society. We hope the material from last week and from today has changed you and increased your resolve to step into action. We hope that you are inspired to listen and learn more, to advocate for change, and to join with others to change our profession and our world. All of the recordings from last week are already on the conference website, and we'll get today's recordings up as quickly as possible as well. We encourage you to visit these resources and use them to spark conversation as you move forward throughout your daily lives. For those of you that have registered for CEUs, follow the procedure listed on our conference website and Eventbrite page links. Links are also in the YouTube description box below. And then also make sure to watch out for our evaluation form, which will come via email after this plenary session. Please make sure to take the time to fill that out and send that to us. We really want to hear your feedback as it helps us put this conference on. And now, on behalf of the Planning Committee for the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference, we ask that you join us in acknowledging that our University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, here in the shores of Lake Mendota, reside within the sacred homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, a place they call Dejope or Four Lakes. As the reach of the university extends to the far corners of our state, we also respectfully recognize the inherent sovereignty of the 12 First Nations of Wisconsin. So whether you are watching this from the land of these 12 First Nations or you are more distant, we encourage you to learn about the history of the land that you are on. Our land-grant university could not have been established or sustained were it not for the state and federally sponsored settler colonialism that disposed and displaced American Indian nations and the communities across our state. We must now confront the outcomes of unjust land treaties and the harm caused by our university's past complicity with policies of cultural and physical genocide as we seek reconciliation with Indigenous nations and communities of Wisconsin. As social workers, we have a duty to look critically at the role our profession has played in the attempted cultural genocide and destruction of Indigenous families, such as was the aim of boarding schools in the state and across the continent. This conference is rooted in critical reflection on our work as social workers. Our goal is to bring clarity about the past, but also to challenge and inspire us all to move into action in our work, in our communities once the conference is over. We hope this conference provides space for critical reflection, humility, and openness, which will allow us all to reflect, to hear, and to tell truths and move toward action and transformation to support Indigenous rights. Not only Indigenous rights, but cultural equity and racial equity. With acknowledging gratitude, we move forward in our journey. The fact that we are on Ho-Chunk land and in the way that we are on it is not separate from what we are gathered here to do today. And so now I would like to turn things over to Bethany Mattinson, a member of the Conference Planning Committee and a current MSW student at our school. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Khadijah. And again, welcome everyone. It's with great excitement and gratitude that I have the honor of introducing our closing plenary and panelists. Again, the title of this closing session is Keeping Radical Hope Alive, a conversation with Ali Muldrow and Oceana Sawyer. So for those of us here in Madison, probably Dane County, and all over Wisconsin, the incredible Ali Muldrow should not be a stranger. Ali is a parent, partner, and the current president of the Madison Metro School District Board of Education. She also is co-executive director of GSAFE and hosts a public affair every Tuesday on WORT radio station 89.9 FM. So please make sure to check her out there as well. Today, Ali will be in conversation with the amazing Oceana Sawyer. And Oceana Sawyer is an end-of-life doula. She specializes in liminal spaces of active dying and grief. She is currently researching somatic abolitionist and embodied grief, developing and holding space for healing through sensual exploration. She is a certified home funeral celebrant, living funeral ceremony facilitator, and conscious dying educator. Oceana holds graduate degrees in counseling psychology and organizational development. Oceana draws upon her meditation practice, experience as a sensuality educator, earth-based spirituality, and intensive study in the expressive arts and integral counseling psychology to bring a grounded, compassionate presence and holistic approach to her work. Through death cafes, end-of-life vision mapping, end-of-life doula training, and virtual grief events and workshops, Oceana has the opportunity to work with individuals and groups from all walks of life. You can follow her on Instagram and participate in her online grief community on Patreon, and those links will also be on the annual conference website, so please make sure to check out Oceana's work as well. So without further ado, please welcome Ali and Oceana.
Bethany, thank you so much for that introduction. Oceana Sawyer, how are you today?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we should be clapping. Yay, applause, we're doing this. I'm so glad to be here with you and continue our conversation, right?
I know, and this opportunity to share space with you. And I have to say, we've met just briefly, and then I became very enthusiastic about following you on social media and following you in the world. And I think, it was really a transformative experience for me to talk to you about radical hope. I think especially in light of the pandemic, and for folks who are watching, if it looks like I'm kind of wrestling a raccoon while we're having this conversation, I am not. I am breastfeeding my daughter, Frida Hallelujah, who's joining us for this conversation, and is, pretty enthusiastic about it herself. So you might see a little baby foot pop up in the screen. I wanted to start with how this journey began for you. So how did you find your way into being a grief doula? And how did you find space for radical, hope at a moment in people's lives that a lot of folks find really devastating. There's a lot of stigma around death. There's a lot of fear and sadness around dying. And you have a really revolutionary perspective of the ends of our lives. And so how'd you find your way to that?
Oh my goodness. Just dive right into the deep end. Well, as we're diving into the deep end, I just want to just take a moment and just breathe and just say hello to all you guys here with us, all you people here with us. And we can't see you. This is a little different format, but you're felt. And that is meaningful. So I had this slide, but I just wanted to, we don't have to do slides, but what I want to do is just encourage you to just sort of relax and kind of sit back. And if you can, go ahead and get yourself your favorite beverage, at least one beverage, and maybe a yummy snack, and just sort of make yourself comfortable, make yourself at ease. Because really the work that you all are doing, that I'm doing, requires this kind of level of attention to our care. So I want to encourage you, even here, as you're talking with me and Ali, take care of yourself. Put some attention on yourself. And if you can, if it's possible and you're near a window, take breaks from the screen, for goodness sake. My gosh, we spend so much of our time on the screen. I can say more about that later, because I am not bothered by virtual space at all. But still, looking outside from time to time is a restful thing to do for oneself. So thank you for the question, Ali. And I love watching you smiling down at Rita Hallelujah. Great name. And I wanted to start by saying that you might have to repeat your question, by the way. But I want to start first by saying I want to bring myself more into the space. And I'd like to hear more about who you are in the space too, because Bethany did a wonderful job of reading our bios, and you know something about me, all of you who are listening, from that. But I'm afraid it's not going to give you a very good prep for this journey we're going to go on together for the next hour. Because really what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking, we're going to be in dialogue, and we're going to be using words. And this is not going to be an information download at all. This is more like a storytelling. We're going to be seeing if it's possible to create worlds, new worlds, with our words. So we're not going to be so focused on the words as much as we are going to be focused on just our presence and your presence, to whatever extent that we can access that. And so who I bring to this place, this presence I'm bringing, is the daughter. I'm the daughter of Vivian, who passed in 2019. She is the daughter of Roberta, who passed at the end of the last century. Roberta is the daughter of Sally. This is my lineage. These are the people I bring with me to this space. And this is important because the people that we work with, especially people in African descended bodies, we know this. We bring these people with us. We bring our ancestors with us, always. I'm also standing on the shoulders this afternoon of my teachers. So a lot of what you're going to hear me speak about this afternoon comes from that. And those are Resma Menachem, the author of My Grandfather's Hands and the generator of Somatic Abolitionism, Bayo Okomolafe, Nigerian scholar who is rethinking activism and Blackness. Ooh, so good. Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategy and Pleasure Activism. Audre Lorde, of course. Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Beautiful writer. If you haven't read Undrowned, I really recommend that you do. Rosemary Campbell Stevens coined a phrase which I'm going to speak about in a minute. And bell hooks, of course. May she rest in power. So my whole life, I think. Oh, wait a minute. Before I even start there, Ali, darling, tell us who you are. Who are you bringing to this space?
So thank you so much for rooting us in that kind of initiation to this conversation. I am the daughter of Julie, who's the daughter of Patricia, who's the daughter of Myrtle, who's the daughter of Sadie. And I greatly appreciate that in the conversations we've had, you've brought our ancestors into the space. And I think, so much of my identity, when I talk about my identity, I feel like it's kind of a list, like what boxes do you check? And so for today, I will back away from that list and say, I am a parent and a person who's deeply and profoundly in love with my kids. And also that I'm really impressed that by your energy, Oceana, because immediately you started talking and my baby just started closing her eyes. And now she's completely resting, like her whole hand is open and so I'm really savoring this conversation and this moment that I get to share with you. And I think, kind of the core of my being is I'm a person who believes in two things fundamentally, and that is love and learning. And so that's who I am today with all of you. And I'm so grateful to get to be who I am with all of you and get to have this conversation with you about radical hope. Because it's radical to be hopeful, and it's audacious to see the beauty in what it means to be alive, and also what it means to depart with life. And I love that you talked about, that this is not an information download, that this is really an opportunity for folks to reshape the world and reimagine the world. And I think that's such a beautiful invitation. So thank you for that. I'm so grateful to get to do it with you.
Mutual. So now you asked me a question about how did I come to this?
Yes.
So yes, let's talk about that.
How did you become a death doula?
How? So it was my father. My father, who had many strokes, because that's what happens to us. We have high blood pressure because we're trying to navigate systems that are not for us. That, as Lucille Clifton so beautifully said, every day is trying to kill us, and we are still here. Yes.
Say that.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So he woke up every day until one day he decided that, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm done. And in my father's characteristic manner, he said, I'm going to party on out now. I'm done. I'm good. So they put him in hospice, and in Atlanta, I flew out from California, because when somebody says, I'm going to party on out, I was like, oh, why would I miss that? So I was also doing some spiritual training at that point, and it was an opportunity to kind of look at what happens at the end of life from a spiritual point of view. And so he and I did that together. We made a spoken and unspoken pact that we are going to together explore, how does a person end their life? How does that look? And so he took 5 days, and I was there every day. And on this last day, my brother and his wife decided they needed to have a break, and they went to the mall. This is not unusual, by the way. often people wait until the family members have left to get out clean. And so when my brother left, I decided to turn the TV off. He had been listening to TV all day, every day, his whole life. My mother too, by the way. I think it's a generational thing. And I turned the TV off, and I just, there was silence. And in the moment I turned the TV off, what was kind of like a stalled death process instantly shifted. It was like an immediate shift, and it was palpable. You could feel it on your skin. And this completely fascinated me. So in this silence, I just prayed or meditated, what's next? And what was next was music. So I just started singing. And as soon as I started singing, there was another shift. And the room just sort of filled up with energy. Now, so I'm using those words because, here we are, we're in an academic situation, sort of, but not really. It filled up with energy, and in my head, I thought, oh, are these like the ancestors? Because, you hear the stories, the ancestors come to take you over, the other side. You hear the stories, and I thought, no, that can't be really happening. And especially my father, who didn't have very strong ties to his people, actually. But nonetheless, there they were. And I was like completely awestruck. And I tried not to do a fangirl moment, like, oh my God. Stay cool. This is a natural, normal thing. This is. So I asked them, as if the ancestors, okay, why are you here? They said, oh, we're here to take him over. It's good to see you, little one. It was really very sweet. And so that went on for a little while. And I thought, okay, I can't really sing like this anymore. So I had to go get the CD. I went out to my car, came back, and in the 5 minutes it took me to do that, or less, when I came back, he had one hand was up over the covers. His mouth was open. His eyes were open, as if he was seeing God. And I thought, oh my gosh, is he dead? This happens at the end of life. The breathing, the time between the inhale and exhale is longer. And he took one last breath, and then he was gone. And the room filled even more energy showed up, which I completely didn't expect. But I'm like trying to dial my brother now. You got to come back from the mall. I'm trying to dial him, I've got him on speed dial. Nothing worked. And after a couple of minutes of trying that, I broke down and cried, and the hospice worker held me, and it was beautiful, lovely experience. But that was the moment I decided, oh, this is my jam. Yes, this is a space I could be in. This is holy, like holy. It's like you get the end of a whole life cycle happens in that space. And I just found that enormously profound. So then I became the person that people asked to be at the bedside, because I was so enthusiastic about it. But
I did ask you to be at my death. I'm like, if I find out I'm terminally ill, I will be calling you. And I think, I think something that struck me about our conversation and about the story you just told was that you did such a beautiful job of connecting our physical body to our spirit and our soul. And I think when you talked about music, you talked about the impact that music has on us physically, on our nervous system. And I would love for you to share that with folks, because I think so many things that we do to celebrate or to grieve or to process or to reset involve music. And I remember you talking to me about this and thinking like, oh, that's why we sing to our babies. That's why we model this to our children. And so I guess I would ask that you just kind of give us a little bit more of that joy that you brought to that moment by singing to your father on his way out.
Yes. You know, this was a true thing from the bio. The bio is true, but this one piece around the liminal spaces. You know, Resmaa Menakem talks about this. These portals between life and not life. You know, a baby comes in, a person goes out. Those portals are potent. And they're potent because they offer you the opportunity to metabolize and metabolize your racial and epigenetic trauma through your entire family line. You know, there's a space that gets opened up there where you can do that work on your own, and I'll talk some more about that. But there's something about that portal at life and the portals of life that make that space especially effective to do that kind of work around the racialized trauma that we collect in our bodies that is both historical and current. And so one of the ways to, and I love the way Nikwana talked about this last Friday in the historical trauma workshop, really well done. But yes, there are these techniques you can use to settle your body if you're having the experience of being activated in terms of trauma. And let's just face it, in these African descendant bodies, we are experiencing some level of ongoing trauma on the daily. And that's not even including the individual losses that we incur, which have been so many during the last couple of years from the impact of the twin pandemics, right? COVID-19, and not that state-sanctioned killing of us is anything new, but it was pretty significant to see it on the screen. And we saw it a lot on screens. And every one of those viewings was impactful to our bodies. Whether we had attention on that or could identify that or not, it still was impactful to our bodies. And so one of the things that you can do, there's actually basically 4 things you can do to settle yourself when you're experiencing racialized trauma or any kind of personal trauma. You can sing is one, and you can rock. You might see me doing this at some point and actually I've already done a lot of moving around. Movement is critical or very effective in dealing with trauma in the body. And let's see, singing, rocking, humming, and moving around, walking outside. And all of these physical things you can do, what they do is they stimulate the vagus nerve. And so I know a lot of you who are watching this are probably very familiar with the vagal nerve theory. But basically it's they call it the wandering nerve because it's the biggest nerve in your whole body. It starts at the base of your neck, goes down through your throat and your chest, into your belly, and down to your sacrum. And so you can see where it's traveling. All of those places in your body are opportunities to touch into it and to if it's activated, you can put attention there and settle it. So the humming is very useful. Putting your hand on your touch. That's another one. I knew there was one I forgot. Touch. You can just touch your chest. And you are there, right there, accessing your vagus nerve and you are settling yourself down. This is why, when we were talking, how important it is, and our mamas knew this, right? The singing and rocking we do with babies, the way that we touch them, we pet their little heads, we stroke their little limbs, all of that is settling to the body. And you can do that for yourself, or you could do that for someone else. Both have the same effect of settling the body. And this is important for us, especially, to know how to settle our bodies, because it's very difficult to access your imagination when you are in a traumatized state. And I'm not even talking about I'm not talking about big trauma, any kind of trauma, whether it's current or remembered. That sort of activation closes down imagination. So as you are navigating your life, it's very helpful, frankly, to yourself and all the rest of us, if you can know how to settle your body. And you see this when people are in a death situation, family members. That's very dramatic and can be traumatic, not necessarily, but it's very dramatic and it's very hard and painful. And you'll see family members are crying. Let them cry, because that crying is the body's way of settling. And so all these techniques we have for navigating the end of life and for grieving are also important, apply to us as people who are African descendant in this country, just in navigating our world here. You can apply those same techniques to bring life, to metabolize grief and loss, and use that as fuel, because once it's metabolized, it can become fuel for you to create something new, actually, a new world, a new life, a new job, a new way to contribute. I think of it like it's very analogous to what happens when someone loses someone very close to them, a loved one. At some point, your identity is tied up with that person, and then they're not there. Once they're not there, there's this period when you don't quite know who you are. And you're never going to be that person again, because that person's no longer in your life. You're no longer the wife or the husband or the partner. You're no longer the daughter. You're no longer the son. That role has ended in relationship to that person. So now you're like in this liminal space where you're between who you were. You haven't quite figured out who you're going to become. And that's grief. And that's again, a potent space. I really want to tell, if I do nothing else here today, I just want to land this idea about how important it is to grieve. Oh my God, so important to grieve. Really. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. People often think that if they're going to be grieving, that they don't want to go there. They're going to fall apart. They're going to be crying for days on end. They may not even know how they're going to possibly stop crying if they really go into grief. By the way, grief is more than just tears. So, you know what? Thank you for naming the clicking noise, because that is my earrings. Yes. When I do death cafes and somebody does that with the headphones, it makes me crazy. Okay. And I didn't mean to just land a big ableist statement there, but it's a little annoying. I'm sorry. Anyhow, grieving is so important, and to the extent to which you can really lean into your grieving, because believe me, it's not going to be forever. You think it is in the moment, And I've had that experience, but it's not. And at some point, you're going to metabolize enough of your sorrow, enough of your experience, and you'll start to turn around and look for, what's my life going to be now? And that's actually the moment we're in right here. Historically, this is the moment that we are in right now as a group of people. Okay, as a citizenry, and certainly as people of the global majority. Thank you, Rosemary Campbell Stevens, for that term. By the way, I don't use color. That is an arbitrary, false science around people, bodies of people based on pigmentation, which is I mean, we all know that's just faux science. It's meaningless. It means nothing. So why even bother using that language? I sometimes ask myself. So I've adopted the term that Rosemary Campbell Stevens came up with, which is people of the global majority, because it's actually accurate. Yes. People from the global south. Go ahead.
I love that. And I also think, like, I've been thinking about how to ask you this question as a person who identifies as Black. And I think, you know, when you talk about the importance of grief, I think I recently had an experience where I wrote about being a survivor of domestic violence. And I wrote about it, 10 years after I left that relationship, as kind of a Mother's Day tribute to my oldest child. And I processed it in a very, in a very kind of, here's the facts of the situation, here are the kind of injuries that I experienced, and here's what it looked like for me to exit that relationship. And in doing that, I kind of awakened my own sadness around that situation. And it was a really informative moment in my life, because I realized, like, I hadn't grieved the losses of that relationship or the suffering of that experience. And I also hadn't, I hadn't given a lot of space for myself, even as I experienced that trauma, to really understand what my own body went through. And I, as I've written about it since then, really realized that I had been in such a state of survival that I was kind of perpetually numb. And it wasn't until I went back and revisited that I had survived, that I was shameless in surviving. I had every right to survive and to put my own health and safety first. That I really had to process that. And so I think for so many of us who navigate oppression, numbness is a survival strategy. And so when you say give yourself permission to grieve, I think one of the reasons we feel like that could be a never-ending well is when you encounter oppression on a daily basis, when your dignity is up for debate in so many aspects of your world, that you could spend a lot of time there. And I think some of us feel, like, what good is that? What good is it to take all that on? And I really appreciate you speaking to how we have the physical need to process and outlet our sadness, that storing it and denying it and being numb from it isn't actually the benefit we've been taught to believe it is. And it also mirrors a mythology of people of color, of Black people, of the global majority, as insensitive, insensitive to our own suffering, and therefore it justifies, the global minority being insensitive to our suffering. I think, how do you talk to people about that numbness and about the survival mechanisms that are, disassociation from pain?
I want to say, let me start with, that's right. Those being all the ways that we have made it through, the numbness, the dissociation, That's not wrong. That's not wrong. We are not defective. Resma says this to us all the time. My beautiful, beautiful black and brown people who descended from people from around the world, you are not defective for making it through, for the numbing, for whatever the addictions are. None of that is wrong. You survived. You're still here, and that counts. What there is also to do is to just touch in. You don't, of course, it seems like it's going to be a big deal because it's a lot. It really is a lot. And this is going to be lifetimes of work, okay? You're not going to take a weekend workshop and all of a sudden be like, oh, I'm free. That's not how it works. I can tell you because I've been doing this work for 2 solid years. But what I can tell you is that if you spend just a little bit of time, you know, boundaries are good things. Carve out some time for yourself. You know, this is especially true when you're grieving, by the way, is you have to have boundaries if you're going to actually be grieving. So that, and what I mean by that is I'm going to spend Saturday afternoon from 4 to 5 o'clock, and all I'm going to do is be with myself. I'm going to be with my grief. I'm going to play the music I want to hear. I'm going to move. I'm going to close the door. I don't want to be disturbed. I'm going to grieve. 1 hour. And when that hour is up, you can dry your tears or turn the music off and go to the next thing if you want to. But the point I'm making here is if you just do a little bit of work, attend to yourself. You start with a somatic practice, a humming, a rocking, some touch, some yoga, some taking a walk in a beautiful place, music. All of these things can help you access your grief or your trauma. And if you just spend a little bit of time with them, nothing more required, just be with. You don't have to fix anything, just be with. And the being with is the space you need to have other wisdom come in and inform you. So people think that wisdom is about what you know with your mind, but there are all kinds of other intelligences in your, that you have access to. There's body intelligence, there's emotional intelligence, there's, of course, the cognitive intelligence. There's all kinds of intelligences. Imagination is an intelligence. You can, if you're just going to be with, and I say be with long and well enough, you can start to feel a shift. And once you start to feel that shift, then some other information comes in. Maybe a message from the ancestors, or maybe something you remembered from school, or a book you read, or a movie you watched. Other information comes in to inform you, to soothe you, to show you a way forward. Perhaps, maybe not. But if you don't try, you won't know. And so after these 2 years of taking little bits of time to soothe myself, I have now, my experience is I have more space. I have more space in my nervous system. I have more space in my body. I have more space in my imagination to think new thoughts. Because that's what they want for us, right? They want us to be numb. They want us to be exhausted. They want us to be tired and scared and afraid and cynical. They want that because that keeps the system in place. But if you are willing to just take a few minutes and address some aspect of your grief, then that makes a little bit more space. And then you go back and you do whatever your life and you come back in and you make a little bit more space. because you spent the time to be with. And all that space you're not just making space for yourself. You're making space for me. And you're making space for the baby. And you're making space for the ancestors. And you're making space for the people down the block. You're making space for community. And it all counts. It all adds up. And so when I started this whole thing and I was talking about we're going to be creating worlds, this is how you actually do it. This is one way to do it. And it's not like you need to change policy or march or protest, and God bless everybody who's doing that. Keep doing that. But these are also ways. And these are ways that are actually generative for us. Because a healthy us, right, an alive us, that is the hope. That right there is the radical hope of creating something new. And I'm all for all these incremental changes, policy and laws and all that. That should happen. That should keep happening. But also, I just want to speak to the people out there who are healers. Perhaps they identify themselves as healers. There's a spot there for that too, and help supporting people in becoming whole again is contributing to our liberation. That is liberatory work for us in our bodies, and it's I don't think it's not to be negated or dismissed, because it's real and it's adding energy to the creation for all of us. And honestly, if you're not in an African descended body, maybe you're in an indigenous body or you're in a Latinx body, all of that work counts, and it all is furthering the liberation for all the people on the planet. And honestly, I really feel like people in European descended bodies should be doing this work too. Yes, absolutely.
I want to talk to you a little bit about I love the idea that this work is generative, and that this work fuels us and energizes us and gives us the space we deserve to heal and to release pain and suffering and to acknowledge pain and suffering. But the other thing I want to talk to you about is, you've talked a little bit about somatic abolition, and I think you've talked a little bit about it in terms of how we exist in our bodies and what it means to exist in Black bodies, in bodies of the global majority, in bodies that have been oppressed, in bodies that have been harmed. Why abolition? Why somatic abolition?
That's such a great question. So abolition is the freeing of, right? The freeing of people from bondage. And so and then somatics is all about soma and the body. And soma is actually more than just the physical body. It's sort of the energy field, associated in the intelligence, all that associated with the body. All of that. So you put that together, it's a kind of like a body, it's freeing of the body. It's paying attention to the body to free it from the experience of being enslaved that has been passed down to us. So while we are existing in this world where we are supposedly free from being enslaved, I figured this out this morning. I was born on July 2nd, 1962, which was just under 100 years from the executive order freeing people who were enslaved. 100 years. That's like if you think of a face of a clock, if enslavement from 400 years, 1619 to 200, 2019, 400 years. Emancipation Proclamation happened around 9 p.m. If you think about it in terms of a 24-hour clock, then the emancipation happened around 9 p.m. So that, all that time, all that history, all that experience is still in our bodies. And so while we might be free, and and that's debatable, legally, there's still many ways in which our bodies are still need to be freed, need to be nurtured into freedom. And so that's what somatic abolitionism is about.
I love the idea of nurturing ourselves into a space of freedom. And I think even the things that are designed to free us, right? I'm a person who's deeply passionate about education. And I think of education as something that so many of my ancestors were denied access to. But then, when you talk about like how free are we right now, I look at my student loans as a kind of a vehicle of transforming me into an indentured servant long term. And I think I couldn't be here and speak to you all at the School of Social Work without acknowledging the role that debt and this kind of current economic structure has had in hindering our freedom and hindering our ability to truly express what we want from the world. And I think, this conversation in so many ways shifts the vibration of how we talk about our lives and our quality of life. Because nowhere in this conversation have you talked about productivity, and what it means to be productive. And I think, I thought about that actually after our first conversation of what is, what is the tie you have to making your life meaningful, and what is the tie that we have to making our death meaningful. And I think, one of my favorite quotes is, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And it's Mother Teresa. And I think the pandemic has really, showed us how resistant we actually are to that idea, how resistant we are to being there for one another, how resistant we are to thinking that love and play and community is enough. And I think, so much of the work that you're doing really holds up a mirror to capitalism and shows us that it won't save us. And I think that the mythology that Black people and brown people and the global majority has been given is that you can buy your way to freedom, that if you just get enough stuff and you just accumulate enough wealth, that's the same as equity and freedom. And I think that the work you're doing rejects that. Can you talk a little bit about the radical hope that is, grief work or being a grief doula, and why you think that, it is both radical and hopeful? Before we close out today, we've got just a little bit of time left.
Oh my gosh, how much? Okay. Okay, so first of all, anytime you're going to be talking about death, it's going to be radical. It's just like nobody wants to talk about death or grief. That, and I think that the part about the leaning into the grieving that is different is because it's the exact opposite direction that most people want to go. And it's counterintuitive, but the opposite, which we've already talked about, if you just kind of keep going, you don't pay attention to your grief, you pretend like everything is fine, then that gets you as far as it gets you. And again, that's kind of what our capitalist system expects you to do. Keep going. But if you turn around, if you do an about face and you go towards grief, you pause. And that's what grief calls you to do. It calls you to pause. There's no like 5 easy steps through grief. That's not how that works. There's nothing to do in grief but to pause, be still, and be with. And that act right there, you have just taken yourself off the treadmill, the capitalist treadmill, the white body supremacist capitalist treadmill. You've taken yourself off of that. You've taken your precious Black body off of the treadmill. And now you are in, you've created a space for rest, pause, grieving. If you don't know Tricia Hersey, then this is someone you should know. She calls herself the NAP Bishop. And she runs the NAP ministry. And she's the one who started these hashtags, rest as reparations. And she comes on Instagram at least once a week telling people, don't get it twisted. This is not just about some bubble baths. This is not what I'm about here. I'm talking about liberation. We are taking ourselves off the plantation. We are taking ourselves off the plantation, stealing away into the forest, which, by the way, is a practice that used to be called hush harbors. Yes. Enslaved people took themselves away from the slave cabins, out into a clearing in the forest where they could not be seen or heard, and they remembered themselves. They remembered their ways. And yes, there's an element where they combine some of that with the Christianity that was being foisted upon them. But, just like African people will do, they took a little of that and combined it with some of their stuff and created something completely new and fabulous. The Black church, spirituality that moves, okay, that rocks, that sings, that settles the body, because they knew that's what was required to make it through until freedom arrived, or they made freedom. This is all technology, if you will, that's in our DNA. This is why taking ourselves off the treadmill, off the plantation, out of the grind for grief, for rest, for pause, so important, because that's where you get the visions. That's where you get the moments to imagine something new. Because remember, you cannot access your imagination if you are exhausted, traumatized, numb. You cannot access your imagination from there. And we need you to access your imagination right now, because again, that's the period that we're in. We're in this time of liminality, where before 2020, it was like, woo, just, we were getting killed left and right, mostly quietly, but sometimes not. There were occasional protests. And then we had the pandemic, where we're all, it's a different time. No one who's alive right now has actually lived through this kind of pandemic before. So this is new. We created a new space. A hole in the universe opened up, a rip in the universe opened up. And so before it closes, we have an opportunity to actually use this time. We can pause. We can grieve well. We can take a look back at our history, both collectively and personally, and see what there is to really just confront and be with and heal. and heal. And however you do that, I've given you a lot of things you could just do on your own, but certainly doing it in the company of a therapist or a social worker or any kind of professional is also good. But I also want to say doing it in groups is the best way. Communal grieving is our way, okay? We grieve communally. That's how we do it. So getting yourself hooked up with some other people, like-minded, who are available to be with you in your grief, that just adds octane to the journey. And that's actually how we start to heal not just ourselves, but our people. That's how we're going to do it. Heal ourselves well enough that we can start to create new worlds that are not so much about incremental policy numbers, but actually what kind of world do you actually want to live in, where you are centered? What kind of world is that actually? What this pause gives you is some space to actually consider it. If you don't consider it, then it's not going to happen. Everything that exists now began in somebody's imagination. Everything. If you can't imagine it, it's not going to happen. Start imagining.
And I think of great leadership as an orientation of the imagination, right? Like great leaders are the people who inspire us to see the world for what it can be instead of for what it is. Dr. Martin Luther King has this beautiful part of the speech he gave when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said, I refuse to believe that we are so tied to the isness of right now that we will surrender the oughtness of what can be and should be.
Say that.
I'm paraphrasing a little, but I'm like, I think, this orientation of the imagination, you've talked about the imagination a lot. And I think of places like jails. I've visited young people in incarcerated situations for, the majority of the last decade. I've gone and sat with children who are incarcerated. United States of America is the only country on earth that sentences children to die in prison. We are the only country, we incarcerate more kids in America than any of the rest of the world combined. And I often think of, what happens to the imagination of somebody who's been incarcerated. And the one orientation that your imagination gets when you're incarcerated is that everything can be used as a weapon. Everything can be used to hurt you. And I think, what it does to folks to see the world through that lens. I think of what racism does to our imaginations, right? It is a delusional experience when somebody has their knee on your neck for them to continue to treat you as if you are a threat. And yet we've created a world in which that delusion is normalized, is a part of our daily lives. So when we reorientate the imagination and we really, reimagine death as rebirth, as energy, one of the things my dad would always say as a kid is, my dad is very much alive. He has told me before when I talk about him to mention that he is alive, because he says sometimes when you quote me or talk about me, I sound dead and I'm not dead. And so my Gardner Muldrow, y'all, is alive and well out here, making it through this pandemic as a lung cancer survivor. So shout out to you, Gardner. But, he said, energy never dies. It just changes shapes. And so I think really, I love that you talked about at the beginning of what you were just saying, the 5 phases of grief not being, reimagining our grieving experience outside of that cliche, right? Outside of denial, anger, bargaining. What are they? Denial, anger.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to forget them. I just want to say, side note here, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross herself said, you know, those 5 stages were meant to apply to death, not grief. I never applied them to grief. I don't know why you people have been applying them to grief. They don't actually fit in the realm of grief. They apply to death, maybe, but yes. Yeah, that whole thing we do with that, it's like, no. Yeah.
Right. And so what is, you know, when you reimagine our relationship to each other, when you reimagine our relationship to the ends of our lives, how do you imagine it? Can you share, like, what is the story you've built for yourself around your own mortality, around your own death?
Oh, thank you for asking, because I have spent time there. Yes. So in the beginning of 2020, I was living in a intentional community in Northern California. It was one of these hippie communes that grew up and is still existing. There's actually about 5 of those communes that exist in the U.S. and they're all grown up now, and they're very professional seeming, and all of those hippies are now baby boomers with inheritances and lots of money, and they're mostly white. And so there I was in my intentional community because I had goals about, you know, communal living, and I wanted to learn that. And these people had a lot of information that I wanted, thought, and needed, and I got it. And then in 2020, the racial reckoning hit, and I was like, oh, we are not on the same page. Not. And somebody said this in the workshop I was in right before this. Adam, I think it's Adam Jackson said this. He said, you know, this might be controversial, but I'm sorry, Adam, I'm quoting you now. But it's only because I heard it someplace else too, by the way. Martin Luther King said it. The biggest impediment to the progress of Black people is not actually the KKK or the white supremacists. Actually, it's the moderate white person. It's that white person who thinks that they're not a racist. They're good. They got this. They're woke. That is the person who's actually, and my experience, actually the biggest impediment to our liberation. And I can tell you, after spending 6 solid months with those people, I tried every day. And the ancestors were like, no, I wanted to go. I was like, oh God, is this over yet? No. And I'm glad I stayed through it, because by the time I got through that whole experience, by the way, only 1, maybe 2 people actually shifted their expression around what was happening with racism in this country. That's out of 50 people. Okay, so 1, maybe 2. But I'm glad I got that experience, because what it allowed for was the embracing, the clinging to my own sense of self as a Black, an African descended woman, and my right's not the right word, my reality around I exist, I will be centered. I have that regardless now. I've heard all the arguments. I've heard all the new agey, aren't we all just one? I've heard them all. And I know the difference. I have discernment. This is something that Resma talks about when we're doing anti-racism work, is there, you have to spend enough time noticing what it is, how it looks in all its different guises, how it looks in your body, in order for you to have discernment, to develop discernment. And that's something I developed. And so now I can say that what my future looks like, and I am heading that direction, is I want to be living among people of the global majority and focused in my spot in that group of people of the global majority on holding the spot of healing. Now, there's some great work, and I did so much research before this, right? I got so many links that Laura has, and this is not a link that Laura has. I'm sorry, darling. But I'm not going to even remember this person's name. It's so good. But it's basically 12 roles in social justice movements, 12 roles in movement work. If you Google just 12 roles in movement, you might find it. And so people think that, marching and organizing is what you do if you're an activist. But there's actually like 11 more different roles. There's healers, there's elders, there's organizers, there's thinkers, there's writers. There's all these different kinds of roles. And I feel like my role, my vision for my life is to occupy the spot of healer in a community of people of the global majority, so that we continue creating worlds in which we are centered. You guys heard me talk about this before we even got on this call, the Afro scene, like that. This is like, in terms of epochs, the environmentalists are saying we're in the age of the Anthropocene, where humans are centered and having the greatest impact. And Bio Okomalafe says, actually, we're transitioning out of the Anthropocene, and we are now moving into the Afrocene. And the Afrocene is about Blackness, but not in the way that you might think about it. Blackness in the sense of, he called it small b Blackness, which is so much bigger than this big capital B Blackness, which is the label that was given to us. But if you look at who we actually are, like before we were kidnapped from the continent and before the colonizers showed up, we had a sense of ourselves in a place, and our sense of ourselves was not just our bodies or our individuality, which is a very European concept. Our sense of ourselves where we were a village. And not only were we a village, we were the earth. We were this ground. We were these trees. We were this river. All of that was part of who we are. So the Afrocene is actually a return to a much bigger sense of who any of us can be, including all those things that got cut off in colonization. So a return to the land, a return to community, a return to family, a return to spirit, all of those things which were, before colonization, just part of a being. We were not that separate. So that's what the Afrocene is about, is a return to remembering, okay? Getting back all those different parts of yourself that have been cut off in our current milieu. And so, as a healer, in my vision, I am helping people remember the different parts of themselves that make them uniquely who they came to the planet to be, the gifts, the contributions that they can make once they are whole again. And that's the world I want to live in. A lot of people who are whole and in their place, in their bodies, moving and singing and laughing and all the things. Beyond this conversation about race, this is such a small, tiny little conversation. I hardly want to be in it, because it's just like, who cares? This is not even anything I made up. My people, we're about life. We're about thriving, and you can tell because we're still here.
Thank you so much for that. I think, I want to touch on something you said about, we grieve in community, and we grieve together. And I think so many of us feel deeply separated from the communities that really hold us and make space for us, and from, our larger or extended families. And I think in the wake of this pandemic, mourning and grieving and coming together to celebrate people's lives has been really challenging. The first Black woman to ever be on a body of governance in Wisconsin died in 2020. And I had known her since I was a really young kid. And I thought, if there was a funeral for her, there would be people lined up around the block to say goodbye. And we couldn't do that. It wasn't safe to do that. So we named a school after her instead. But I think, for a lot of us, cultivating that space to be in community and to love people and to acknowledge that we've lost people is really challenging right now. And I think about times where we've had like candlelight vigils because, something tragic happened in our society. And I think like we haven't done that for the people we lost to this pandemic. And I guess for those of us who are processing that, what are the spaces that you create, beyond yourself and in community, in order to support you in this work? And what does that look like during COVID?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question, because this brings me back to something I said way back in the beginning, which is I am not bothered by virtual space. Honestly, the virtual spaces saved me. When I was living in that community, I made it because every day I was in a workshop or in a group something with people of the global majority. Every day, looking at these faces, holding me, seeing myself there, remembering myself in these spaces, hearing the stories. And I really feel like in these virtual spaces, people get all tripped out about it. Like, oh, I'm so tired of being on Zoom and. But, here's the thing. It's your reality. It's your world. You can make it however you want to make it. And I personally have chosen to use the space as a resource, an opportunity to resource with like-minded people. And that's one of the things I hear this a lot in my death cafes, by the way, which are only for people of the global majority, is that people come to these spaces, all these beautiful Black and brown people, and almost everybody says, I'm so glad that this space exists because I can't talk to anybody about my grief or death. People think I'm weird. Family members, people who look just like them, but they come to this virtual space and they are seen and they are heard and held. And it's virtual, but it's something. Of course, it would be much better for us all to be together again, doing candlelight visuals, singing the songs, rocking together, wailing together. Of course, that would be better. And some people can do that still. I personally can't, but some people can do that. And that's great. But for the rest of us, this counts. And it's so important, actually, to find your community, find your people, I'm not going to use that word that everybody wants to use. Find your clan. There you go. It's important to find your people, find your kin. Because those are the people who are going to sustain you and resource you through actually creating these new worlds, these nourishing places in the physical. So like until you can gather people around you physically who can hold that space for you, these virtual spaces are very useful, and they can actually support you in creating physical spaces for grieving, because now you have information, you have experience, you have skill in how to do that. And you can do that then live with people in your area. That's what I've been doing with it.
I wish we had so much more time, but I think this is going to be my last real ask of you, is to talk with us about your mom, and what she meant to you and how she connected you to this work, and I think who you got to be as a young person and that relationship. And I think I took so much away from our first conversation in the way that you talked about your mom and loved your mother. So I think that's where I'd like us, that's the meditation I want us to end on.
Okay, I'm reading the chat. My mother was a nurse, and she knew, like for a lot of people, that she was dying before she was diagnosed. And I figured that out, fortunately, about 3 months before she died. She would say things, and this is interesting. This is good to know. She would say things like, "Do you know where the money is? Do you know where that is? Do you think Philip is going to be okay, my brother?" And then at first I was just, "Oh, Mom, you're fine. Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. You're gonna, please, you're healthy. You're gonna be fine." And then I realized that, because I was reading some book on the end of life, I realized that, oh, she's telling me she's dying. So the next time she said, "Do you know where and I might not wake up tomorrow morning, the next time she said that, it didn't take long. I said, "Okay, how would you like that to go?" And to my surprise, she said nothing. She just went, okay. And you know that when the Black mamas go, that's like, okay, we said it. Nothing more is required. We got the whole communication. And so from that point on, our relationship changed. And I became her doula. And I did all the stuff you're supposed to do. Get a diagnosis so you can get the good drugs. You want to be comfortable. But I also was her daughter, and we said goodbye, and we said all the things. We told all the stories. We said all the regrets. We said all the joys. My brother too got in on this. I told him, Mom's dying. He said, I kind of thought that. I said, so now your job is to tell her you're going to be fine. Okay. Don't ask for any more money. Just tell her you're going to be fine. And he did that. And he came up more, and he spent more time with her. And the three of us spent more time together. And my mother said towards the end, she said, "I'm really glad you're doing this work. It's so important, especially for us." My mom doesn't dish out compliments very often, and that one landed. That one landed. So important.
I don't think I could ask you for anything more than what you have given all of us. But I want to say thank you, Oceana, for bringing your story and your family and your incredibly peaceful voice to all of us, but particularly to me and Frida today. It has been an absolute honor to get to share this space with you and have this conversation. And I've made a plan in my heart to
Right.
meet you in person. We are, just so you all know, we have a date to hang out and have our favorite beverages.
Beverages, right?
And so I cannot thank you enough for your leadership and for the soulfulness you brought to this dialogue. And I think, for those of you out there listening, I just have to give a little quick plug. Oceana Sawyer has a book that's coming out. And I think, we'd all benefit from this wisdom in this text. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And Bethany, welcome back.
Thank you.
Can I get in here now? All the love to you, sisters. All flowers. All the love to you both.
Thank you so much to both of you. This was such a beautiful conversation, and I just can't even express how much appreciation and gratitude we have for having you both here to share this and close out our conference. It was really lovely. So thank you so much. Thank you.
A true pleasure.
And a final thank you to everybody watching. I hope that you enjoyed this as much as we, the planning committee, enjoy bringing such beautiful people and conversations to you all. Just a reminder that if you need to go back to this and want to see it again, you will have the opportunity along with all of our other conference content, as it will be on the website soon. So please make sure to check that out. Please don't forget to respond to the evaluation survey that you'll receive via email this afternoon. Your feedback is really important and valuable to the planning committee as we work really hard to make this conference better and better every year. And as a reminder, one more time, you will hear about us from CEUs if you registered to receive them and filled in the Google form connected to the plenary. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us for this conference again. It has been a great pleasure being a part of the whole team that brings this to you. And we look forward to seeing everyone in some space next year as well. Take care.